It's one of the most misunderstood topics in Ireland and around the world.
Stop 5G! Stop 5G!
For some, it's a reason to protest. For others, it causes fear and anxiety. And in some cases, there is plenty to fear. Because one type of radiation causes more deaths every year in Ireland than road traffic accidents. And what's worse, it happens inside our homes.
In this episode, I'll be exploring the topic of radiation, the causes, the myths, and what scientists tell us is the real risk here in Ireland.
As a psychologist, I've always been interested in the patterns of the human mind. One of the most fascinating is how we process fear and anxiety.
Sometimes what we fear the most isn't even a threat to us, and the things we should fear we avoid. Radiation fits that pattern of thinking. Most of us are frightened of it, but we don't actually know what we're frightened of.
In this programme, I'm taking a journey into the human mind in order to unpick our anxieties surrounding radiation, to understand what fears we should have, and what we can do about them. To start, I'm visiting a place very few people get to see. Ireland's been keeping tabs on radiation since the early 80s. And on the roof of the physics building at University College Dublin is one of our most powerful monitoring machines.
So this is the high volume aerosol sampler, and it's used for sampling particulates in the air. So this one is the flow rate that I'm recording now. I'll take a max and min value. I'll also take the total volume of air. I can then turn the unit off, and I'll take one final measurement of the little bit of air that has passed through, and then take the elapsed hours at a time.
The high-volume aerosol sampler collects atomic particles as they're sucked through the machine over the course of a single week.
So a large pump draws the particulates from the air underneath the stone and onto the filter.
How does what you're taking out of the filter help us to measure radiation?
This is a week's worth of particulates that have been taken from the air and deposited on this filter. So once we take this filter, we're able to process or analyse it within the laboratory.
What would you be expecting to see?
We'd be expecting to see a certain amount of natural radioactivity. What we wouldn't be expecting to see or be surprised to see is any sort of high levels of anthropogenic radionuclides present on the filter.
So that's man-made radiation?
So this is man-made radiation.
Man-made radiation is all around us. But so is natural radiation. It comes from the sun, from the earth. It's even given off between people. Knowing when radiation's harmful is the tricky part. Dr. Ciara McMahon is the director of the EPA's Office of Radiation Protection and Environmental Monitoring. She leads a team whose job is to examine every radiation risk in Ireland to determine what is safe and what is dangerous.
There's a lot of talk about different forms of radiation, for example in mobile phones or 5G. Are they harmful types of radiation?
At the levels that people are exposed to, no, they're not. There have been tens of thousands of studies around the world, including by the World Health Organization, which have established that once the levels stay within the internationally set levels, they are safe.
TVs, mobile phones, and of course phone masts produce what's called non-ionising radiation, which is not harmful at the levels any of us could be exposed to. Ionising radiation, however, can be extremely dangerous. So man-made sources, such as nuclear plants, are kept under close watch by Ciara and her team.
So this sample here was taken after the Fukushima accident, and we can see, as well as the natural radionuclides, this peak here, that was iodine-131. That's a radionuclide that you get from nuclear facilities, particularly nuclear accidents. Now the levels here, they're would have no health concern, but we were able to detect the equivalent of 1 atom in a room. So it's really sensitive equipment. It's for something which is a long way away. If something were to happen closer by, we have a whole network around the country. So from Donegal to Kerry to Dublin, all around the country, and that's working 24/7. That was put in after the Chernobyl accident.
What about nuclear plants that are in England or France?
We can detect the signal from Sellafield, but the levels are incredibly low. When we add together Chernobyl, nuclear weapons testing, Fukushima and Sellafield, it's less than 1% of the radiation exposure that people are getting.
The risk of nuclear radiation is small in Ireland, but that doesn't mean there aren't other risks.
And so what is the biggest or the most dangerous cause of ionising radiation in Ireland?
In Ireland, it's radon. We know that there are around 300 deaths of lung cancer as a result of radon every year in Ireland. And most people who have high levels of radon in their house don't know that.
And so all of the sources of radiation that we worry about the most are not as dangerous as maybe the thing that we don't think about, which is radon.
Exactly, yes. People think about the Chernobyls and nuclear Fukushima and nuclear power plants and so on, or 5G, but what they really should be concerned about is, has my house been tested for radon? And if it has and it's high, have I done something about it?
The risks of radon gas are completely avoidable, and yet it kills 300 people every year, twice as many as road traffic accidents. Ireland's risk is one of the highest in Europe, mainly due to where radon gas comes from: rock. To understand that, I'm meeting with geologist Dr Quentin Crowley.
Ultimately, it comes from uranium, and uranium is all around us. It's in everything, usually in very low concentrations and small quantities. If a rock or a soil contains higher concentrations of uranium, then it's more likely to contain higher concentrations of radon gas. This is something called a shale, and you can see it's a very dark rock, slightly shiny, and we find this in certain parts of the country, like in parts of County Kerry and parts of County Clare. And we do find elevated radon associated with this, so we can find it in the soil, which is above this rock, and sometimes we can find it in people's houses. There does seem to be like a suite or a set of different types of rocks, which make an area more radon prone.
Are there features in the rock that make radon gas more likely to be present?
So if you look at this rock surface over here, you can see that it's kind of covered in all of these fractures.
Is this the little cracks that
Yeah,
are here?
so all of these cracks over here, if you can picture that there's a gas, and the gas can actually travel through these fractures in the rock and make its way to the surface. And this makes the prediction of radon much more complex. We can picture where we expect the sources to be, or the high radon to be, and sometimes we find higher radon away from these sources. So we have to understand not just the geology, but different properties of the geology and how these different layers interact with each other.
Radon gas emanates from uranium in bedrock, comes up through the layers of subsoil before seeping into our homes, where it can become deadly. It's why Quentin has been working with the Geological Survey of Ireland and the EPA to construct the most detailed radon map of Ireland ever created.
Here we have an old geological map of Ireland, and you can see different colours on the map, and these correspond to different rock types. So the red over here is granite. This is Wicklow granite, and you can see this is Galway granite. North County Clare, we'll see there are Clare shales, and also parts of Kerry down here. We can use information like this about the bedrock to better understand radon in the environment. But we can also look at things such as the soil properties, the permeability of the soil. We can look at the sands and gravels. This is a different map showing the different types of sands and gravels occurring in Ireland. And this is another map of the different aquifer types.
So it's not as simple as just measuring radon in different areas. There's all of these various disciplines that work together to create something like
Absolutely. And when we put all of this together and we look at the distribution of indoor radon, we can develop a new kind of map. Something like this is going to appear on the EPA's website, radon.ie. So you'll be able to put in your postcode and look at a different area. You can see there's an association between certain parts of the country where you have, for instance, the darker areas, or where you're more likely to find higher indoor radon. But also you can see in parts of North County Clare It's associated with the Clare shales.
Quentin's radon map highlights some of the most dangerous hotspots in all of Europe. That knowledge is inspiring new research on the ground.
Radon gas comes from rock beneath the Earth, but when scientists study it, that often happens above the Earth. This patch of soil may not look like it's releasing high quantities of radon, but it could be.
Maeve Hughes is a researcher who has been examining the radon content found in one of the highest risk areas in the country, around the community of Castle Island in North County Kerry.
Geologically speaking, we're standing on top of a type of bedrock called Clare shales, and this type of bedrock has more radon in it.
What is it that your research is examining?
So my research is essentially trying to validate that you can use geological data to predict indoor radon risk categories.
To carry out her research, Maeve takes soil gas samples in order to measure how much radon gas is rising up through the soil from the bedrock, in this case Clare shale, underneath our feet. Once she has the sample, she puts it into a special machine to measure the radon.
What we have done is we've taken the gas sample from the subsoil and we've put it into this steel canister, and the alpha particles in that gas sample are giving off little sparks of light, and the canister and the machine are essentially counting how many sparks there are. After 2 minutes, we get a measurement of the amount of radon in the soil gas.
Maeve has already taken 50 of these soil gas tests in an area around Castle Island over 6 kilometres squared. These tests are all feeding into her overall research.
And do we have a reading?
We actually do. It says 609,000 becquerels per metre cubed.
How does that compare to other measurements?
A typical value would be about like 20 or 30 or 50,000 becquerels per metre cubed.
Okay, so the radon concentrations here are quite substantially higher than what you would consider the average.
Very high.
Okay.
Outdoors, these high radon levels aren't dangerous. The gas simply blows away. But indoors, they're deadly. One of the highest radon readings ever recorded in Europe was in a house here in Castle Island. Shockingly, experts found radiation exposures equivalent to living next door to 50 Fukushima accidents every year. Over a prolonged time, that exposure can be lethal. What does this mean for the people who live here?
Years ago, Castle Island became known for having some of the highest radon gas levels ever recorded in Ireland. That is something that no town wants to be known for.
Part of the town sits on Clare shale, a bedrock containing uranium which emits radon gas. If this radon becomes trapped in a building, the risk of cancer skyrockets. When 3 people living in one house died, including a woman in her 20s, people got scared. Local journalist John Reedy remembers how, as the anxiety spread, word leaked beyond the community.
Jimmy Dean, a local TD from North Kerry and former Kerry footballer, raised it in Dáil in around 2003. And all of a sudden then everybody was talking about becquerels per cubic metre and stuff like that. We had everything off about radon gas. Apparently there was no getting rid of it. It was silent, odourless and colourless and things like that, and you couldn't see it, you couldn't even feel it until it was too late.
So there was a lot of fear about radon gas, and what did that fear make people do? What was happening in the community?
There was a call for public meetings for information, and the head of the Radiological Protection Institute of Ireland came down and he addressed the meeting here in the River Island Hotel. The meeting was full, it was packed. The frightening thing about it was that people didn't know what was frightening them. They didn't know what they were facing.
John, do you think people find it tough to talk about radon gas?
They do, because look, you're talking about their house, where they live, where they raise their children. Any attack on your home, I suppose, isn't something that you would relish. And to be told that you could die in your home, to die of a silent killer that steals into your house and takes your life. People were not encouraged to talk about radon gas in their houses and stuff like that, because it would be a kind of sense of shame, I suppose, in a way, that you didn't want to be running down yourself or your own house or your neighbourhood and that kind of thing. Yeah, it was almost as if it was being looked upon as bad housekeeping or something like that, which it wasn't. No. It was nobody's fault.
Since Castle Island made the headlines, over 4,000 deaths have been attributed to radon gas nationally. While the source can't be stopped, the risk can, if you know you have a problem. In Castle Island, the EPA encouraged every resident to get a radon test, at one point even offering them for free. Incredibly, less than 20% took up the offer. Some psychological conundrum was keeping people from availing of the free tests. But this phenomena is not unique to Castle Island. The Radon Map of Ireland suggests that over 130,000 homes are at high risk. Yet most don't get the simple €50 test. The EPA are now working with a psychologist to understand why, by examining our unconscious decision-making patterns.
We all hold certain biases when it comes to the beliefs that we have or maybe the information that we seek out. Are there certain biases that inform how people respond to the threat of radon?
Well, there are two primary biases that we have been looking at, what we call optimism bias and confirmation bias. So the optimism bias, or unrealistic optimism as we might call it, is essentially one where people feel that the risk of acquiring cancer or lung cancer from radon, because it takes so long, therefore they don't really need to do anything about it right now, so they tend to put that off. But at the same time, confirmation bias is it's a kind of a thinking error that creeps in, where we tend to seek out information that supports what we currently believe, and that usually means you don't need to test. So you put those two things together, you kind of get the start of a cocktail that doesn't really work very well for the current circumstance.
What would you suggest that people think about when they are thinking about radon?
Think about the idea that radon is there all the time. It will be here until the world stops spinning. And so it's present right from, day one of everybody's life. So really, I think it's more about thinking about the long-term health and well-being of people in your household.
It's interesting because when we talk about the things that we worry about, the solution or the way of tackling worry isn't to worry more, it's actually to realise what action we can take.
That's true, and I think this is where if people are feeling that perhaps they don't want to think about it, that they want to put it off, maybe they might feel that their home is perhaps going to be devalued because somebody might think that it's not a desirable place to live anymore. I think they've got to really understand that those worries really don't have a foundation to them. That radon is something that can be managed very easily, and that it's worth doing. It really is worth doing. So if a person wants to buy a test kit, then they can go to radon.ie. They can order one of those, they can install it easily into their home. They can check the levels, and then if the level is high, they can have a discussion with the contractor or the EPA about that and see what the solutions will be for that.
Trust the science, get your radon measured, and then take action if necessary.
Absolutely.
I actually have my own radon story. The first house I ever owned had high radon levels. It was an older house, but it was surprisingly easy to fix. All the work was done outside with little disruption. And the best part was that once it was done, the risk was gone. It is that simple. But there are people working to make it even easier. Eugene Monaghan believes no one should have to worry about radon gas. On a slightly foggy day, we tagged along to see why he's been given the keys and full access to 15 houses being built by Wexford County Council. With their support, along with the EPA, he's researching how best to protect new homes from radon gas.
Okay, so this is a sump terminal cap, right? And this is in every new house in Ireland. So this is connected to this here. This is a radon sump. This is underneath the floor in your house. This allows the radon to be extracted from underneath the floor, okay? Now, the idea of this is that it's used in the event that we have high radon levels, okay? But most houses are not tested. So these are very rarely used. And we have somewhere between 400 and 500,000 of these lying idle. In addition to that, houses in high-risk areas must have a radon barrier, okay? So this is a radon barrier. And the idea is that you put this down before you build a house, and that keeps out the radon. The problem with this is it's very, very difficult to seal. For instance, we have this barrier, and we want to put a pipe through it, because we have to bring the pipes through the floor for the toilets and for the sinks. So what we need to do is we put a hole in it. Okay? And we bring a pipe through it. Okay? That's not sealed anymore. It's like a puncture in a tire.
It's nearly impossible to stop radon gas seeping into your house. So Eugene is focusing instead on how to get rid of the gas once it's there.
Okay, so this is the sump which we saw earlier, and a pipe has been inserted into the sump. That's what we call activating the sump. So the sump is now activated. That pipe is brought up the wall. So if you blow air across a pipe opening, you will create a draw in the pipe. In addition to that, we're going to try to increase the draw of radon up the pipe by attaching this to the top of the pipe. It captures more wind energy and makes the whole thing work more efficiently.
For his study, Eugene takes baseline radon measurements with the sump closed, maintaining complete control of the houses.
We close all the doors, we close the windows, seal up the air vents, turn off the heat, turn off the ventilation units, and allow the radon levels to build up. At the moment, we have 5 houses here with the sumps closed, and we test those every weekend. And then we have 5 which have the stacks. We do a comparison each weekend of the houses which have the sumps open and the houses which have the sumps closed. We can check radon levels by the hour, and we can check the effect of opening and closing the doors. We can check the effect of rainfall. So we can go to any particular house. Let's find one here that is a good example. If I go to this house here, around the 22nd of May, we opened the sump and we installed the pipe, and we can see that that brought the radon levels down, and the levels stayed down. And then at this point here, we took the stack off and we closed off the sump again, and we can see the radon levels rising again. So far, the data we have shows that we are reducing radon levels by somewhere between 40 and 50% just by the addition of this passive stack. Now, we are also studying the effect of putting this ventilator on top of the pipe, and the first indications are that it's having a positive effect, but we can't put a figure on it yet because it's too early.
The study is proving that a simple and cheap fix can massively reduce the threat of radon gas.
What I would hope to see is that the building standards will be changed to require new homes to have a passive stack, and that will go a long way to reducing deaths from radon in new homes in Ireland.
Radon gas is by far the most dangerous form of radiation we're exposed to here in Ireland. As researchers unravel the risks, it's becoming more and more clear what actions we must take.
The idea of radiation can make us anxious, but scientists are showing exactly what we need to fear and what we don't. It's now up to you and me to act on it.